My name is Nayla Corey, and 11 days before my wedding, I was handed a letter with my future mother-in-law's signature on it, informing me that my parents were not permitted to attend the rehearsal dinner, the wedding brunch, or, in writing, in black ink, any future family occasion of the Weller family, in perpetuity. Not this one time. Not, we're keeping the guest list small. In perpetuity. Diane Weller handed the envelope to me herself, across a table at the country club, without sitting down. "This isn't personal, Nayla," she said. "It's a boundary. Every family has them." Then she smoothed her blazer and walked back to the valet stand like she'd just returned a library book. I said nothing. I folded the letter, put it in my bag, and drove home going exactly the speed limit the entire way, because I already had a feeling. A small, cold, professional feeling. The kind I get at work when a property record doesn't add up. That this boundary had nothing to do with etiquette. I was right. And Diane Weller had no idea what she'd just handed me. But to understand why a signed letter from my fiancé's mother sent me straight to a county records office instead of straight to tears, you need to know what I actually do for a living. I'm 33. I'm a title and escrow compliance analyst. For 9 years, my job has been reading the parts of documents other people skip. Deed histories, lien releases, dissolved business filings, the fine print nobody proofreads because they assume no one's ever going to read it twice. I find the gap between what a document says happened and what actually happened. Most people think that's boring. I think it's the only honest job I know, because paper doesn't get nervous. Paper doesn't lie to your face. It just sits there, waiting for someone patient enough to open the folder. My fiancé, Adrian, knew this about me before he knew almost anything else. On our third date, he asked what I did, and when I explained it, he said, "So you're basically a detective who never has to leave a desk." I told him that was generous. He laughed. That was 2.5 years ago, and I still remember exactly where we were sitting, because it's the same laugh he has now, at 34. Running product development for his family's company, Weller Home and Hearth, a home goods brand about to launch its biggest national ad campaign in company history. The detail that mattered most growing up wasn't dramatic. It was a business ledger. My father, Elias Curie, ran a small furniture restoration and custom carpentry shop for 11 years, Voss and Curie Furnishings, before it closed when I was 11 years old. I don't remember much about the closing itself. I remember the ledger. He kept it in a cedar box on top of the refrigerator, and some nights, if I couldn't sleep, he'd let me sit at the kitchen table while he went through old order forms. Not because there was anything left to do with them. Just because, he said, a business doesn't disappear just because the doors close. Someone has to remember what was true. He never told me the full story of why the shop closed. Just that his business partner made some decisions, and that after that, my father worked as a delivery driver for the next 19 years and never opened another shop. I grew up thinking my father was simply a cautious man. It took me until I was 33 to understand that caution and grief can look identical from the outside. The imbalance started small, the way it always does. Diane Weller has a way of rearranging a room without raising her voice. At the engagement dinner, she sat my parents at the far end of the table, near the kitchen doors, and introduced them to her side of the family as Adrian's fiancés people, which is a phrase I've turned over in my head roughly 400 times since. She corrected my mother's pronunciation of our own last name once gently, in front of 6 people, as though she were doing my mother a kindness. When Adrian and I got engaged, Diane sent a wedding planner a 17-item list of coordination notes. Item 11 read, bride's parents to be seated separately from immediate Weller family at all pre-wedding functions. Logistics, not exclusion. I only saw that list because the planner accidentally CC'd me on an email meant for her assistant. I mentioned it to Adrian once. He said, "That's just how my mom is. She runs everything like a spreadsheet. It's not about your parents." I believed him mostly because I wanted to. I've since learned that "it's not about you" is one of the most effective sentences in the English language for making someone stop looking, the letter at the country club was the inciting moment. But I want to tell you what happened 40 minutes before it, because Diane didn't mention this part. My mother, Rana, had asked, politely, in a text message I still have, whether she could bring a dish to the rehearsal dinner. Something small, a gesture. Diane didn't respond to the text. Instead, 2 hours later, my mother received a phone call from Diane's assistant, informing her that logistics had shifted and that the rehearsal dinner headcount was now closed. My mother called me, upset but composed, the way she always is. "I don't understand what we did," she said. That's the sentence that has stayed with me the longest out of this entire story. Not because it was dramatic, because it was honest, and because at the time I didn't have an answer for her. I called Adrian. He said he'd talked to his mother. 2 hours after that, I was standing in a country club parking lot holding an envelope that used the phrase "in perpetuity" to describe my own parents. I didn't confront Diane that week. I've learned, professionally, that confronting someone before you have documentation just gives them time to build a better story. So instead, I did what I do at work every day. I started pulling records. I began with something small, and I told myself, harmless. I looked up Weller Home and Hearth's corporate filing history, the way I'd look up any company, out of nothing more than curiosity about the family I was marrying into. 22 years of filings, name changes, a dissolution, an acquisition. And there, in a 2004 dissolution filing for a company called Voss and Weller Furnishings, was a name I recognized immediately because I had read it 1,000 times on the spine of a Cedar ledger box. Voss, not Corey. Voss, my father's business partner's name, the one who, according to my father, made some decisions, had been Marcus Voss. The dissolved company that became, eventually, through 2 more name changes and 1 acquisition, Weller Home and Hearth, had been founded in part by a man named Voss, and Diane Weller's maiden name, listed on a 23-year-old marriage certificate I found 40 minutes later, was Diane Voss. I didn't sleep that night. I want to be precise about what I felt, because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was the specific, quiet dread of realizing a coincidence isn't one. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office where I've worked for 6 years, and I asked a friend of mine, a records clerk named Priyasha Mehta, to pull everything she legally could on Voss and Weller Furnishings and its dissolution. We sat at her desk for 2 hours. Priyasha has the kind of patience for paperwork that most people reserve for their own children, and she walked me through it in plain language, the way she'd walk anyone through it. So here's your father's company, Voss and Curie Furnishings, filed 1998, and here's a separate filing, same year, for Voss and Weller Furnishings, a holding entity. Same Marcus Voss, 2 businesses, one with your father, one with a man named Richard Weller. Adrian's grandfather, I said. If Adrian's grandfather is Richard Weller, yes. She pulled a dissolution notice dated 11 months before my father's shop closed. "This is the part you want to see," she said and turned the screen toward me. It was a payout ledger, a settlement of $411,000, owed from the dissolved holding company to Voss and Curie Furnishings, my father's shop, as compensation for assets absorbed into the larger Weller entity. The ledger showed the payout was authorized. It also showed, in a second column dated 11 days later, that the funds were redirected, not to my father, but to a personal account belonging to Marcus Voss. Here is where I want to be careful, because this is the part of the story where it would be easy to make Marcus Voss a simple villain. And the truth is heavier than that. Marcus Voss died 6 years before I was born to Adrian. I never knew him. What I know from the filings and from one conversation I'll get to is this. Marcus Voss was drowning. His half of the business, the larger holding company, was on the edge of bankruptcy because of decisions made by his own father-in-law at the time. Richard Weller, who had personally guaranteed loans against the company and was threatening to let the entire operation collapse, taking my father's much smaller shop down with it, unless Marcus found a way to protect the Weller side specifically, Marcus redirected the settlement my father was legally owed, $411,000, not into his own pocket to keep, but into a Weller family trust account to satisfy Richard Weller's loan guarantee and stop the bankruptcy that would have wiped out both companies. He saved the Weller side of the business. He sacrificed my father's. He never told my father why. My father spent 19 years believing his partner had simply stolen from him out of greed. He never knew there had been a gun to Marcus Voss's head, a financial one, but a real one. Diane Voss Weller was 26 years old at the time. She was Marcus's daughter, and she had typed the redirection paperwork herself, at her own father's instruction, the summer before she married into the very family whose debt that money quietly paid off. That's the deeper reveal. And once I understood it, the letter in the country club parking lot stopped looking like snobbery and started looking like something closer to a confession Diane had been avoiding for 22 years. She didn't ban my parents from meeting the Wellers because she thought we weren't good enough. She banned them because my last name, Khoury, was the one name on earth that could walk into her son's wedding and recognize what the redirected settlement had actually been. She'd spent over 2 decades making sure the Voss and Khoury history never resurfaced. And then her son fell in love with the daughter of the man her own father's company had quietly ruined. The letter wasn't a boundary. It was a firewall. I sat with that for 3 days before I did anything. What finally moved me wasn't the ledger. It was a television commercial. Weller Home and Hearth's 50th anniversary campaign launched on a Tuesday night during the evening news, right after my parents finished dinner. My mother called me, confused, and put the television on speaker. The commercial opened on a warm, golden-lit shot of a hand-carved wooden armoire, a specific hinge detail, a specific curved leg design, and a voiceover said, "For 50 years, Weller Home and Hearth has been built on original craftsmanship, passed down through generations of the Weller family." I recognized that armoire. I recognized the leg design and the hinge detail because I had grown up watching my father carve that exact pattern, by hand, in our garage, and I had seen the original sketch for it, signed and dated, inside the Cedar ledger box on top of our refrigerator my entire childhood. It wasn't a Weller family design. It was my father's. Marcus Voss had brought it into the holding company decades ago as a joint asset, and Weller Home and Hearth was now selling it to the entire country as 50 years of Weller heritage, in the same 50th anniversary campaign built on the same redirected money that had ended my father's shop. My mother, on the phone, said quietly, "Nayla, that's your father's armoire." She didn't sound angry. She sounded like someone watching a ghost walk across her television screen. I called Priyasha again that night, and the following week, we requested the original 1998 design assignment paperwork from the State Archive, the kind of filing most people don't know exists, a design and craftsmanship attribution clause, filed alongside the original Voss and Khoury Furnishings Incorporation. My father, meticulous even then, had filed it to protect his own designs before entering the joint holding company with Marcus Voss. The clause was unambiguous. The armoire design, and 11 others like it, were explicitly retained as Elias Khoury's individual intellectual property, licensed, not sold, to the holding company for a term that expired in 2009. Weller Home and Hearth had been manufacturing and now nationally advertising a design my father owned, 17 years past the license's expiration, without his knowledge, without a cent, and was calling it Weller Family Heritage in prime time. I didn't go to Diane first. I went to my father. I sat at his kitchen table, the same cedar box, still on top of the same refrigerator 22 years later. And I laid out everything: the dissolution filing, the payout ledger, the redirection to the Weller Trust, the expired license, the commercial. My father read through it slowly, the way he reads everything. When he got to the payout ledger, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I always thought he just took it." He wasn't talking about the money. I think in some way he meant the whole 19 years. I said, "He didn't keep it for himself." He gave it to Richard Weller's bank to save the company. He let you believe he stole it because the truth, that he sacrificed your shop to save someone else's, would have been worse. My father didn't say anything else that night, but he asked to keep copies of every page. I confronted Diane on a Thursday afternoon at her office with copies of everything, because I have learned that the version of a confrontation that actually works isn't the one where you yell. It's the one where you place documents on a table in chronological order and let someone read their own history back to themselves. She tried the cover story first, that the Armoire design had been developed collaboratively within the original holding company and that any design attribution disputes would have been settled decades ago in the Dissolution. I placed the 1998 attribution clause in front of her, the license expiration date circled, then the payout ledger, the redirection date highlighted, then, last, the marriage certificate with her maiden name on it. You typed this yourself, I said. The redirection paperwork. In 2004, I have your signature, Diane Weller, who had never once raised her voice to me in 2.5 years, put both hands flat on the table and for the first time since I'd known her, didn't have anything ready to say. What she said next, after almost a full minute of silence, is the part of this story I keep coming back to, because it's not the part that makes her look good, and it's not the part that makes her look like a monster either. My father told me if I didn't sign it, we'd lose everything, she said. I was 26. I had a 6-month-old baby. That baby was Adrian's older half-brother, who died at 19 in a car accident I only learned about that afternoon. A loss the Weller family has apparently never discussed with outsiders in 20 years. I have spent every year since telling myself it wasn't stealing, it was surviving. And every year, it got harder to imagine saying it out loud, because the longer I waited, the more it looked exactly like what it was. She said the ban on my parents wasn't cruelty toward them specifically. It was fear, a very specific, very old fear, that if Rana and Elias Khoury ever sat across a table from Richard Weller's family and started comparing notes about 2004, the entire 50-year Weller heritage brand, built in part on my father's uncredited designs, would collapse days before her son's wedding. I want to be honest about the itemized outcome, because this isn't a story where everyone hugs and the credits roll. Weller Home and Hearth's legal team, once presented with the attribution clause and expiration date by an attorney I hired, a very calm woman named Farah Okonkwo, who has handled exactly this kind of dispute before, settled rather than litigate a nationally televised heritage claim built on a lapsed license. My father received $280,000 in back licensing compensation, spread over 3 years, plus a corrected attribution credit on all future Weller Home and Hearth packaging and advertising. For the 11 original Khoury-designed pieces still in production, it is not the full $411,000 redirected in 2004. Ms. Okonkwo was clear that the original 2004 diversion itself was outside any statute of limitations we could pursue directly, given Marcus Voss's death and the passage of time. What we could pursue cleanly was the current, ongoing, provable use of my father's intellectual property without license, and that's what the settlement covers. My father used part of it to reopen a small workshop. Not a full business, a workshop. He carves on weekends mostly for himself now. My relationship with Diane remains, honestly, unresolved. We are polite. We are careful. I don't think either of us knows yet whether careful will ever become something warmer. The person who shifted, unexpectedly, was Adrian's aunt, Diane's younger sister Carol, who had been present at Marcus Voss's kitchen table in 2004 when the redirection was decided, though she was only 19 at the time and had no legal role in it. Carol found me at the rehearsal dinner, the same one my parents had originally been banned from, before Diane, to her credit, personally rewrote the guest list herself once the settlement was finalized. Carol told me she'd carried a version of guilt about that year for 2 decades, quietly, without ever fully understanding what she owed an apology for, because Marcus never explained it to the family either. "I just knew something happened to a man named Corey," she said, "and that we weren't supposed to ask." She apologized to my father directly that night in front of everyone. He shook her hand. He didn't say much, but he kept the handshake a beat longer than he needed to, which, if you knew my father, told you everything. I think about the Cedar ledger box more now than I did before any of this happened. My father used to say a business doesn't disappear just because the doors close. Someone has to remember what was true. I understand now that he wasn't only talking about a business. Diane Weller wasn't a villain in the way the country club letter made her look. And Marcus Voss wasn't a thief in the way my father spent 19 years believing. They were two people making impossible choices under someone else's pressure. And the cost of those choices landed, quietly, on people who never got a vote. My father, and 22 years later, almost. My parents' seats at my own wedding. The paperwork didn't erase what it cost my family. It just finally told the truth about it. A signed letter can hide a person's fear for 22 years. It just can't do it forever. Here's a question I keep sitting with, and I'd genuinely like to know what you think. If you found out someone you loved had made a devastating choice under real threat, not out of greed, but to survive, does that change what they owe the people it hurt? Or does the why matter less than most of us want it to? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if stories like this one matter to you, make sure you're subscribed to Justice Unfolds, because every story here has a reckoning,